Thank you very much, Kaori-san. Good morning from Tokyo. Welcome to ADBI Featured Speaker Webinar. Today, we are very delighted to have the Governor Benjamin E. Diokno of the Bangko Sentral Pilipinas as ADBI Featured Speaker. He will discuss the macroeconomic outlook and sustainable recovery in the Philippines and the broader Asia and the Pacific in the face of emerging uncertainties. Governor Diokno will also draw upon his participation in the 2022 spring meetings of the International Monetary Fund and World Bank that convened global financial leaders to consider monetary policy next steps amid the growing geopolitical tensions and the financial stability threats. After his keynote speech, we will have a panel discussion between the governor and ADBI experts, followed by Q&A with the audience. Please let me give an introduction for the governor. Dr. Benjamin E. Diokno is the current governor of the Bangko Sentral Pilipinas. Under his leadership, BSP responded to the COVID-19 crisis with prompt and extraordinary monetary measures to cushion the Philippine economy against the shocks. The international publication, the Bangko, subsequently named him the Global Central Bank Governor of the year 2022, a first for the Philippines. Prior to his appointment at BSP, Governor Diokno served as Budget Secretary from 2016 to 2019, marking his third stint at the Philippines Department of Budget and Management. The Budget Secretary, he pursued an expansionary fiscal policy to finance investments in human capital development and public infrastructure. Please welcome Governor Diokno.
Dean, good day, everyone. It is my pleasure to join you today and share updates on the Philippine economy. The Philippines is well into the recovery process. After the pandemic-driven recession in 2020, the economy grew by 5.7% last year and sustained robust momentum with an 8.3% growth in the first quarter of 2022. Growth in the first quarter was broad-based. On the supply side, all sectors expanded, driven by industry at 10.4%, followed by services at 8.6%. On the export side, growth was driven by household consumption, which grew by 10.1%. Gross capital formation expanded by 20%. Growth of government final consumption was subdued at 3.6%. The employment picture is close to pre-pandemic level. From a peak of 17.6% in April 2020, unemployment rate is down to just 5.8% in March this year. Moreover, foreign direct investments grew 54.2% to all-time high last year. In the first 2 months of the year, FDIs grew by 8% to $1.7 billion. Manufacturing activity has also rebounded, with the Purchasing Managers Index hitting 54.3% in April, the highest in over 4 years. Both business sentiment and consumer outlook have improved. Our business expectation survey showed broad improvements in outlook for the coming months. All this came on the back of a whole of government approach to recovery. In tandem with the national government's efforts, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas rolled out its own list of COVID response measures. First, we cut policy rate by a cumulative 200 basis points to a record low of 2%, which helped stimulate provision of credit to productive activities. We also reduced our reserve requirement against deposit and deposit substitute liabilities. For universal commercial banks and non-bank financial institutions with quasi-banking function, we reduced the reserve requirement from 14% to 12%, effective 3 April 2020. For 3 banks and rural cooperative banks, we reduced it from 4% to 3%, effective 31 July 2020. Second, we extended time-bound liquidity support to the national government and purchased government securities to help finance its pandemic response programs. In sum, the BSP has injected over 2.2 trillion pesos, or approximately $41.9 billion into the financial system. This is equivalent to about 11.2% of the GDP. And third, the BSP put in place key regulatory and operational relief measures for banks, which help maintain the financial system's stability and ensure the public's continued access to financial services. As we transition from one administration to another, the central bank will continue to fulfill its mandate of ensuring sound macroeconomic management. On the whole, there are clear indications of continuity of key reforms under the new administration. As the economy recovers and gradually returns to normalcy, the BSP is mindful that the extraordinary measures will need to be scaled back. The timing and conditions of the BSP's exit strategy will be guided by the inflation and growth outlook over the medium term, the state of public health, and domestic and global risk to the economy. Earlier, the BSP's provisional advances to the national government of 540 billion or 10.3 billion US dollars in 2020 and 2021 was reduced to 300 billion pesos or approximately 5.7 billion US dollars in January this year. Today, the national government will fully settle these advances ahead of the maturity schedule of June 11, 2022. Unwinding the extraordinary measures was one of the messages highlighted during the IMF World Bank spring meetings held last April. Balancing the need to safeguard economic recovery and controlling inflation would be a key challenge for policymakers going forward. The balancing act requires a well-planned, well-calibrated, and well-communicated exit strategy to avoid causing substantial volatility, reduce potential spillovers, and continue the recovery momentum. For the Philippines, economic recovery came sooner than we expected. The economy grew by 8.3% in Q1, and we expect the economy to grow much faster in Q2, making the growth target for this year of 7 to 9% doable. Employment is nearing its pre-pandemic rate. The Purchasing Managers Index hit 54.3% in April, the highest in 4 years. In response, we have started the normalization process. Yesterday, we raised the policy rate by 25 basis points to 2.25%. We entered the pandemic with strong macroeconomic fundamentals. Our healthy external accounts, marked by hefty gross international reserves, helped maintain relative order in the financial markets amid the crisis. The government's fiscal space allowed it to spend massively on COVID-19 response without incurring unmanageable debts. We reformed the tax system. Before the crisis, we simplified the tax structure, rationalized fiscal incentives, reduced personal income tax rates, increased taxes on oil, cigarettes, and sweetened beverages. With the new tax system, the incoming administration will be in a better position to face the challenges of the post-pandemic economy. And the stable banking system, which benefited from regulatory reforms over the years, remained able to provide credit to consumers and businesses. Loan growth is steadily picking up. In addition, prudent lending standards of banks help to keep the rise in bad debts within manageable levels, while ample capitalization enables them to absorb shocks. At the IMF World Bank spring meetings, economists were encouraged to set longer-term goals that go beyond the immediate challenges of achieving full recovery from the pandemic and tempering the impact of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Such goals include reskilling and upskilling workers, pushing for digital transformation, and promoting a more sustainable future. I'm proud to share that we are making progress on all these fronts. On reskilling and upskilling of workers, concerned government agencies in the Philippines have rolled out programs to help workers adapt to changing labor demands. On digital transformation, the central bank's policy agenda includes digitalization of the country's payment system. By 2023, we aim to digitalize at least half of all retail payments and ensure at least 70% of Filipino adults should have transaction accounts. Complementing this reform is the recently passed Financial Consumer Protection Act. The legislation provides regulators more power to act on and improves the resolution mechanisms for financial consumer complaints, including those involving cybercrimes. The central bank has also issued 6 digital banking licenses in line with our digital payments transformation roadmap. On sustainability, the central bank is at the forefront of promoting sustainability principles in the financial sector. We have issued regulations requiring banks to incorporate such principles into their operations. We are also among the early investors in the Bank of International Settlements Green Bond Fund and the Asian Green Bond Fund. The Philippine government did not let this unprecedented crisis go to waste. It did not sit idly by and wait for the coronavirus to subside. Instead, it continued to pursue game-changing reforms, which would make the Philippines a preferred investment destination. For instance, it passed the Corporate Recovery and Tax Incentives for Enterprises, or CREATE law, which cut corporate income tax to make it competitive with its ASEAN peers and rationalized the fiscal incentive system. In addition, 3 landmark laws were enacted to further open the Philippines to foreign investors. This include the amended Retail Trade Liberalization Act, the Foreign Investments Act, and the Public Services Act. During the last 6 years, the government invested heavily in public infrastructure. The goal is to make up for past neglect, which earned the Philippines the distinction of having one of the poorest public infrastructure in the ASEAN region. From 2016 to 2020, infrastructure spending as percent of GDP averaged 4.6%. In 2021, actual infrastructure spending reached 1.1 trillion pesos, or 5.8% of GDP. These numbers tell the story of the government's commitment to improve mobility and create a better investment climate. One thing is obvious. The next administration will have a better state of infrastructure and a more robust economy. The next administration will receive a long list of implementation-ready infrastructure projects. A total of 88 infrastructure flagship projects for completion in 2023 and beyond will be up to the next administration to continue. Taking all this into consideration, we're optimistic that the Philippine economy will post an even better performance following a solid rebound last year. We expect the economy to grow by 7 to 9% this year and by 6 to 7% in the following years. Having said this, like the rest of the world, the Philippines faces risks to its growth outlook, among which are the deterioration in the COVID situation and a prolonged Russia-Ukraine conflict. On COVID-19, the Philippines is managing risk of potentially new variants emerging through sentinel surveillance and protecting the vulnerable population through accelerated vaccination. As of May 10th, 69 million out of the target 90 million Filipino population have already been fully vaccinated. On the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the channel through which we see the most material impact is on domestic prices, but we expect this to be manageable. Based on latest estimate of the BSP, inflation could average 4.6%, slightly above the 2 to 4% target range this year, before moving back to within the target band next year at 3.9%. The BSP supports timely implementation of targeted non-monetary measures by the national government to prevent price pressures from broadening. And these include direct financial transfers to vulnerable sectors and efforts to boost domestic production and importation of certain food commodities. For its part, the BSP is prepared to take preemptive action when there are strong indications of a possible disanchoring of inflation expectations. In closing, while the Philippines is on track in achieving full economic recovery in the near term, we must all collectively continue to work together to overcome current and emerging challenges. Now more than ever, we must put a premium on stronger international cooperation to achieve our vision of a green, resilient, and inclusive global economy. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Governor. For very clear and informative presentation speech, from which we have learned that high economic growth is back, that banking system remains stable, and that the economy is ready for recovering fully from the pandemic and the tempering effects of the geopolitical tension. And so there are good reasons for being optimistic. Now, with your permission, I'd like to invite my ADBI colleagues to ask some questions. So first is John Byrne, Vice Chair of Research at ADBI. John, please start.
Yes, thank you very much, Dean Sonobe. And thank you very much, Governor Diokno, for a very interesting presentation. My question relates to the implications of the Ukraine conflict on supply chains and inflation in the Philippines, and how you come to make your monetary policy decision. So in particular, bearing in mind the implications of the lags in monetary policy and price pressures externally in terms of their duration.
Okay, thanks, John, for that question. The Philippines has limited direct trade linkages with Russia and Ukraine. As such, the overall impact of the decreased trade flows from Eastern Europe on the domestic economy is subdued. The channel through which we can experience more material impact is prices. The risk of disanchored inflation expectations due to the conflict could affect price and wage setting behaviors and lead to a broadening of price pressures. In view of domestic and global economic developments, the central bank, the BSP, revised its inflation projections to 4.6 in 2022. It used to be within the range of our target to reflect the impact of the Russia-Ukraine conflict on commodities and financial markets. Now, this is, as I mentioned, above the target range of 2 to 4%. In 2023, the average inflation is projected to revert to within the target range at 3.9% as oil and non-oil prices normalize. With the potential spillovers from Russia-Ukraine conflict, the BSP continues to monitor closely the emerging risk to the inflation outlook and remains vigilant against possible second-round effects from supply-side pressures or shift in the public inflation expectations. In addressing immediate supply-side constraints and tempering price pressures from higher global commodity prices, the central bank emphasizes the critical role of the national government's intervention, including initiatives to ease importation of certain food items and direct subsidy to the vulnerable sectors. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. You're muted.
You're muted.
Thank you, John. So next I call Linda Asa, Senior Capacity Building and Training Specialist. Linda, your turn.
Thank you, Dean, and thank you to you, Governor Diokno. My question is about remittances. And of course, the Philippines, as we know, is heavily relies on foreign remittances in its economy. And although, as you say, Governor, the Philippines may not feel acute pressures at the moment from the war in Ukraine, of course, the foreign remittances come from all over the world in countries that may be very impacted, and hence the Filipino overseas workers there may be impacted as well. Does the central bank have plans for a possible downturn in remittances from its overseas Filipino workers due to the war?
Thank you for that question. Actually, at the height of the crisis, most analysts predicted a double-digit decline in remittances, which is rational. But it turned out that during the height of the crisis, the overseas Filipino remittances declined by only 0.8%. And I attribute that to the altruistic nature of the remittance. You know, Filipinos overseas, they send more money back home when they think that there are problems in the Philippines, okay? So it only shrunk by 0.8%. But this year, remittances from, for example, from January to March increased by 2.3%. But last year, 2021, it actually increased by around 8%. So the remittances, I think, has become a steady and reliable source of foreign exchange for the Philippines. In fact, the value of that is around $31 billion coming in every year. And then if you add to that what we call the receipts from the business process outsourcing, which have now become more popular with the digitalization, that's all another $30 billion. So between the remittances and the BPO industry, that accounts for around $60 billion steady inflow every year. And I'm very optimistic on the remittances because I think that because of the pandemic, we'll be exporting maybe a higher quality of labor, more doctors, more nurses, more data scientists. And so I expect remittances to even increase in the future.
Thank you very much, Governor.
Thank you. Next, Peter Morgan, a senior consulting economist and advisor to the Dean.
Thanks very much, Dean Sonobe. And thank you, Governor Diokno, for a very nice presentation. I think it's quite impressive how the Philippine government was able to support the economic recovery, but still maintain strong macroeconomic fundamentals. So my question deals with financial inclusion and digitalization. As you mentioned in your presentation, the BSP aims for 70% of adult Filipinos to have formal bank accounts and 50% of all transactions to be digitalized by 2023, that is next year. Can you tell us what the current status is of these measures, and are you on track to meet these ambitious goals?
Thanks, Peter, for that question. The BSP is on track to meet its goals on financial inclusion and payments digitalization, thanks to a great extent to the pandemic. As of Q3 2021, we estimate that about 41 million, or 53% of adult Filipinos already have a transaction account with financial institutions. The mobility restrictions necessitated or required by the COVID-19 pandemic serve as a catalyst for the broader adoption of digital financial services. In 2020, about 21.1% of retail transactions are settled through digital payment channels, as more Filipinos own transaction accounts, which they use to keep deposits and or make payments. We estimate that from 2020 to the third quarter of 2021, around 20 million unbanked adults have been onboarded to an account based on the increase in the number of basic deposit accounts and active e-money accounts. Now, with game-changing reforms like the Philippine National ID system, the pandemic-driven momentum to use digital financial services for various transactions, and the whole of government support for high-impact initiatives, for example, government-to-person digital disbursements, internet connectivity reforms, among others, we're optimistic that there is sustained trajectory toward the 70% account ownership target by next year.
Thanks very much. And one more question, if I may. If the Philippines implements central bank digital currencies, i.e. CBDC, what design aspects do you think could maximize the positive impact on financial inclusion?
On CBDC, the BSP finds it essential to conduct experiments on wholesale rather than retail CBDC, which may be used for inter-institutional fund transfers among banks and non-bank financial institutions. The central bank may use the learnings from a pilot project, which we are launching this year, ascertaining how a wholesale CBDC may potentially be deployed to address pain points in cross-border payments, settlement of securities transactions, and intraday liquidity. Meanwhile, the sustained progress in digital transformation of retail payments and the broadening financial inclusion in the country make retail CBDC not highly relevant for the country in the short to medium term.
Thanks very much.
Yes, thank you. And then now I'd like to call Yixin Yao, Senior Research Fellow.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean, and thank you, Governor. And thank you very much. Governor, you give us a very clear, vivid whole picture of the Philippines economy. I used to work for the ADB headquarters for 3 years and live in Manila. Until today, I still keep my salary account in the major bank of Philippines. And as I know, Philippines, thank you, is one of the fastest growth developing economy in the world. So my question is, what is your opinion on the role of inclusive finance in the sustainable and inclusive recovery? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. The role of inclusive finance is crucial in ensuring that the most vulnerable groups, including smallholder farmers and micro, small, and medium enterprises, have effective access to a broad range of welfare-enhancing financial products and services. The agriculture and the MSME sectors, which serve as primary sources of livelihood for many Filipinos, are among the sectors hardest hit by the pandemic. So climate change can also disrupt business operations of MSMEs and pose a significant risk to their performance, to their competitiveness, and to their sustainability. Now, against this backdrop, supporting these productive sectors has never been more critical than during this time of bouncing back from the economic downturn caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Increasing access to financial products and services for the underserved and unserved segments of the population is expected to unlock a large potential to usher the country's economy toward a sustainable and inclusive recovery. So the BSP strives to establish an enabling regulatory environment that allows a variety of players to serve the diverse needs of the unserved and vulnerable sectors of the economy viably and responsibly.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you very much.
You're on mute, Dean.
Unmute.
Yeah, so next person who asked question is Young Lee, a senior capacity building and training specialist. Young, your turn.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you for insightful presentation, Governor. I would like to ask you on implication of U.S. monetary policy normalization on sustainable finance. U.S. monetary policy normalization is one of the biggest challenges in the emerging market. It could drive capital outflows from emerging market. In particular, countries that issued many foreign currency bonds during COVID-19 could have a refinancing risk. I think sustainable finance could be an alternative financing. As the demand for sustainable bonds increase among global fund managers, we can finance the required funds for sustainable recovery with a lower cost and risk than conventional bond through a sustainable finance. My question is, what are the implications or impacts of the U.S. monetary policy normalization on debt management or sustainable finance in the Philippines?
Okay, thank you for that question. The basis of the BSP's monetary policy decisions, including the eventual shift toward normalization of extraordinary liquidity measures and accommodative policy settings, are consistent with the objectives under the bank's sustainable finance framework. Now, in deciding on its exit strategy, the BSP will continue to aim for a balance between providing adequate stimulus to fuel the momentum of the economic recovery while preventing the buildup of inflationary pressures and risk to the soundness of the financial system. Now, meanwhile, green and sustainable finance instruments encouraged by the BSP Sustainable Finance Framework are also intended to support economic activities and safeguard the stability of the financial system against potentially significant and protracted impact of climate change and other environment-related risk. As we exit, we will make sure that the exit will be gradual, it will be well communicated, and it will be outcome-based. Policy normalization should not serve as a limiting factor on the ability of financial institutions to offer green and sustainable finance. And the BSP will commit to exit when it begins to see evidence of sustainable recovery and or increasing risk to inflation. And we have started our exit as of yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Governor.
Okay, so now I would like to ask one question. So ADBI is marking 25th anniversary this year. So on this occasion, I'd like to kindly ask the governor's thoughts on ADBI's next chapter.
Well, thanks, Dean, for your question. First, I'd like to congratulate the ADBI on your 25th anniversary.
Thank you very much.
The Institute has made a significant intellectual contribution to development discourse in Asia and continues to be an important platform for ideas and discussion for the region. Over the next 25 years, I'm confident that the ADBI will play an increasingly important role in enabling the ADB to achieve its aims in the 7 operational priority areas. To this end, there are 3 aspects I'd like to highlight. Economies face common challenges, such as in the areas of climate, technology, and public health. National policymakers, however, tackle issues in different ways. And consistent with ADB's country-focused approach, the ADBI can grow its research library with a repository of best practice policies so that national policymakers can continue to learn from each other. I've long called for central banks to work closer together and coordinate responses. I think that an intellectual platform that tracks what worked and what failed could provide a great service to national governments. The second area I want to highlight is technology, specifically how it enabled developing countries to leapfrog traditional stages of development and help rural areas catch up with cities. Tech adoption is foundational to rapid development. However, national regulators often lag in providing frameworks that encourage rather than stifle innovation. National policymakers would benefit greatly from research that enable regulators to approach the cutting edge. Finally, marrying up grand continental visions with change at the community level is a hard intellectual exercise, but one that is crucial. The differences in capacity and approach among countries offer valuable insights. However, the bird's eye view can overlook intra-country provincial disparities, especially for Asia's archipelagic nations, where there is great capacity and policy differences between provinces and cities. For instance, in our financial inclusion drives in the Philippines, the BSP is conscious of how different provinces are in digitalization and making sure that their financial services are relevant to the local communities. For example, the BSP is promoting Islamic banking to drive inclusion, specifically in the Mindanao region. Finally, I want to thank the ADBI for bringing us together today and continually enabling fruitful discussions. And I look forward to seeing the ADBI grow in step with the ADB and the whole of Asia. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Governor, for great insight into the future of the ADBI. And thank you also for your kind words. Okay, so now we are moving to the Q&A session with audience. So Kaori will moderate this session.
Okay, thank you, Dean, for your sharing the button. And the Governor, so let me address some of the questions which came to a Q&A box here. And then most of them touches your keynote, and then they're asking for further information from you. And that start with ESG related questions, and then inclusive policies by the BSP, and also a lot of questions coming on how BSP controls inflation, and also CBDC issue. So let me try to sort of summarize some of them. But to start with the first question, which came from Hannah Fernandez from Eco Business. She's asking about ESG. And then, so you mentioned that BSPs has started requiring financial institutions to disclose their exposure to ESG risks for under your green strategies. But according to this month's withdrawal from core report, banks that that banned no-call financing policies through their investment banking arms still have exposure to coal by underwriting and selling bonds of coal developers. As we enter a new government, how can the BSP further push our local banks to have clearer coal investment policies and transition under the new government? I think this is about greenwashing issue, if you could address that.
Thank you very much. Under the present administration, we have what is called Green Force. Okay, this is an interagency committee consisting of 24 agencies. This is chaired by the Secretary of Finance and co-chaired by the Governor of the Central Bank. And so we provide a framework and we monitor performance. I hope that will continue to the next administration. Okay. On the part of the central bank, we have issued several resolutions, and on sustainable finance framework, we issued one in April 2020, and then another one in October 2021. We expect the BSP supervised finance institution to be on board and implement our resolution by 2023 next year. So we on the matter of energy, shifting from coal to renewable energy, we cannot do that overnight, of course. Okay, and I'm aware, and this is relevant for ADB, that they have a technical, or they have a loan where they encourage the shift from coal to more environment-friendly source of energy. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. And another big question that everybody had, including all of us here, how does BSP address this balance between recovery, like progressing recovery and pushing for recovery, as well as how you balance containing inflation, so which you of course referred in your keynote, but especially because your country just experienced the presidential election and you will go into new administration. So people are very much concerned about how you balance this, juggle these two things. If you could elaborate on that.
Thank you very much. As you know, the primary mandate of the central bank is to maintain price and financial stability. On the other hand, before the crisis, the economy was growing at around 6 to 7%. And so because of the pandemic, the economy declined. We had a recession. So our concern then is to restore growth and at the same time restore employment, because with the downturn, unemployment increased. But that's really not the primary mandate of BSP, although we help them by providing a stable framework. And so we actually succeeded. Okay, the economy now has bounced back. It grew by 5.7 in 2021. We expect it to grow by 7 to 9%. There were many doubters whether we can grow at that rate, but we had 8.3% in the first quarter of this year. And mind you, that is despite the fact that there was a surge in January. So we have only 2 months to work that 8.3%. That's why I'm optimistic that the second quarter will be much better than the 8.3%, because then we don't have the surge that we experienced. But okay, now going to the question on we had an election, but it was an orderly election, and there will be a smooth transition of power. And one thing good about this new set of officers, I would say, is that for the first time, the winning candidate has an overwhelming majority. Okay, so he has the support of the electorate, and they elected the Filipino people elected a team. Not in the past we elect the president from one party and the vice president from another party. That has been the pattern, right? But for the first time, this time you have a team being elected, and so I think because also overwhelmingly. So with that overwhelming mandate, plus they are working as a team, and in fact, their senatorial slate, I think only one from the opposition won. So they have a very solid legislature and a strong mandate. And they have also indicated that they are going to continue towards what is being done by the current administration, which is strong on public infrastructure. We have this build program, or initially what I called the golden age of infrastructure in the Philippines. And we would like to thank Japan for helping us a lot in this regard, because they funded most of our big infrastructure projects. So I think that should continue. The build program should continue because it enlarges the capacity, improves the capacity of the economy, and it also creates a lot of jobs. But at the same time, as been done by this administration, and I hope the next administration will continue, we should continue to invest in human capital. We have a very young population, median age 25. In an aging world, that is an asset. So we have to invest in them so that the future of this country will be much, much better. And finally, as I mentioned, we did not sit idly by while the coronavirus is raging. We continue to adopt structural reforms. And I mentioned landmark legislation that we passed, which in effect will make the Philippines more competitive and a more attractive place to invest in.
Governor, thank you so much for your very wrapped up answer. And actually, in connection to your stress on the Philippines fundamental being very strong, ready for fast, rapid, and robust and sustainable inclusive recovery. So there's a question from Pradeep Panthi. He is asking about the specific key elements that ensures the Philippines recovery. And then, so this question is talking about the data for 2020, okay. The institutional quality, specifically, this is a question about institutional quality of the Philippines. And in this data from 2020, it showed stability of institutional quality of the Philippines in the last couple of years, and financial stress was not so high during the pandemic, which you mentioned. Do institutional structures help to implement monetary policies effectively? How was your experience with sustainable recovery concerning monetary policy implementation? You touched on that, but I think this is also a great interest, benefit for our audience, if you could elaborate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it would be a mistake to look at the performance of nations in 2020, because that is really an outlier. That's the height of the pandemic globally. Okay, so don't focus on what happened in 2020, but focus. To me, I would call attention to the international and regional rating agencies continue to affirm our investment grade rating, despite the downgrades of many developed and developing emerging economies. So that's confidence in the Philippine economy, because they look at our finances, as I said, during or before the crisis, we reform our tax system. And that speaks well of that is a major plus for the incoming administration. He will inherit a much better tax system. And second, on the exchange rate, for example, I remember I've been in government for so long that I remember every time we have a crisis, we run out of dollars to service our foreign debt. Okay, so we run out of dollars, and as a result, the currency has to be devalued, etc. But this time, because we have instituted a lot of reforms, we have 10 waves of reforms on our exchange rate. We now have a gross international reserves of more than 9 months. The receipt doctrine is if you have reserves equivalent to 3 months of your imports, you're okay. So we have 9 months. And I mentioned earlier, at the same time, we have now a steady source of foreign exchange, like the overseas Filipino workers, the business process outsourcing, the FDIs are now has increased. So that explains why the Philippine peso is relatively stable compared to its Asian peers. There's a lot of confidence in our handling of our own economy. And that, as I mentioned again, is supported by the international and the regional rating agencies.
Thank you, Governor. I think we have just one more quick answer from one more question that we can pose before we go to closing. So this question came from Warren Guzman from ABS-CBN. And then this is about CBDC, which you mentioned. And you also mentioned that BSP needs to experiment CBDC first. And then the question is about, do you have any clear timeline for this experiment? And also, which institution will participate in this experiment? Or will it be a wholesome application?
Well, you know, we have a well-functioning retail payment system, which is digital, Personet, and so there's really little value added if we go into retail CBDC. Okay, so that's why we are focusing on wholesale CBDC, and as I said, we are going to launch that the CBDC PH the fourth quarter of this year. And it involves a number of financial institutions. And so let's see where we go from here. Okay, but as I said, we have already a well-functioning payment system, digitalized. And so we want to make sure that that works first before we go into other areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor, for this information, which probably is new. And also now I'd like to give the floor back to Dean Sonobe, who will give closing remarks. And also Dean Sonobe, I have a quick information I need to relay. We'd like to do another group photo at the end. So if you could just give me 30 seconds, that would be great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Kaori.
Thank you very much, Governor. So we have learned a lot. For example, the financial system remains stable and the inflation is kept at the manageable level. And so the primary missions of the central bank are achieved. And in addition, the bank has helped to maintain the employment and boost economic growth. And the employment will increase in the second quarter. So overall, the Philippine economy is on a right track for rigorous, sustainable recovery. And moreover, the bank is leading the digitalization of the financial sector, including CBCD, and also financial inclusion. And for that purpose, the bank takes the community level differential approach, including the Islamic banking, and so very innovative. So which is one of the impressive takeaways. And so there are abundant reasons for being optimistic. And then, yeah, thank you very much also for the nice tip for the ADBI's next term. And then also thank you very much for answering so many questions, very efficient. So we are very happy to have you here as a featured speaker again in the future. And so all the best. And then, yeah, so, and also we have learned from you that those workers, Filipino workers abroad, worked hard and then sent money back more than the normal time. So it's really great. So that spirit of the Filipino people, together with traditionally high level of human capital, and then the great leadership like yours will continue to will help the economy continue the economic growth and development in the future. So we are very much looking forward to the further development, sustainable development of the Philippine economy.